Go ahead.
Don't you want to give the welcome to Matan speech?
Oh, yes. Okay. I forgot that this isn't our first of the semester. Yes, thank you everybody for joining. Dr. Nava Finkelman will be giving a class on the Yosef Story. And as I said, it's interactive, so please participate and I hope you enjoy.
Okay. Hello. Okay, this is the Yosef Story, which soon I'm going to rename and call it something else. I just liked calling it the Yosef Story because I thought that sounded kind of nice. For this class, you will need a Sefer Bereshit. I don't think you need a whole Tanakh, but you'll need a Sefer Bereshit. We're going to be using it. And you're going to please help me by not making me talk all the time. And you're going to ask questions and you're going to give comments and you're going to disagree with me. Okay, hopefully. Okay. Trying to figure out how to see everybody here. Huh? Okay. Let me start sharing screen. That works, right? We all see that? Thank you. Hebrew or just Hebrew's fine. Okay. Okay, here we go. The Yosef Story. The Yosef Story is the longest ongoing narrative in the Torah. Certainly in Sefer Bereshit, unless you consider Moshe Rabbeinu an ongoing narrative, but that's, I guess. You know what? I'm not sure it's longer. If Moshe started when he's 80, or most of the stories when he's 80, 40 years, I don't know, whatever. It's a long story, okay? And I think it's one of the better stories in Tanakh. Let's look just specifically within Sefer Bereshit where it is situated, okay?
They made a Broadway show out of it, right?
They made a Broadway show and they wrote many books about it. Exactly, okay? So it is a good story, okay? And most of us know the story, right? Let's say most of us know most of the story. There may be some details here and there, but we're going to look at in this class is not the story itself. We're also going to obviously see the story itself, but I'm going to focus on the poetics of the story and the ways in which the story was created and crafted, just because it's a fantastic story and it's a great excuse to look at these kind of things. I'm saying ahead of time, I should say at the beginning of each class, I'm not going to say at the beginning of each class, but I'll say it occasionally, that almost all of what I'm saying is totally indebted to Professor Yoni Grossman of Bar-Ilan University, who taught a fantastic class on this. And one of these days he's going to come out with his Yosef Story book. So I'm not being original here. I'm building off and he gets all the credit. And if his book ever comes out, you should buy it. Okay, I said it, I'm gonna say it at some point again. All right, let's look at Sefer Bereshit. Okay, this is where you open Sefer Bereshit. And even before you open Sefer Bereshit, you already know, okay? What is the first part? What are the main chunks of Sefer Bereshit? Okay, what is the first section of Sefer Bereshit deal with? Huh? Briat Olam. Okay, we have the beginning stories, all the universal stuff, right? We have the Briat Olam and the Noach and the Bigdal Bavel. Let's put that all together and call it universal stuff, right? Everything that has to do before pre-Avraham, okay? So this is all pre-Avraham, this is all universal. Great. What's the next stage in Sefer Bereshit?
Avraham.
Also, Zoom people can talk up Avraham stories, right? Okay, you have a whole bunch of Avraham stories, and the next chunk that comes in Sefer Bereshit is
the rest of that book. We have Yitzhak. Yitzhak's very little. It's not much said about Yitzhak, so we put him in with Avraham, or you can do him with Yaakov's more of a story than.
I agree. All right. When I first made this slide, you don't see my slide. It says Universal Avraham Yitzhak. When I first made the slide, I put Yitzhak stories in parenthesis or with a question mark because there are not really that many Yitzhak stories. Okay, there's one Perek Avav is the Yitzhak story, where there's some stories there. But okay, let's say just for the form of it. Okay, and after the Yitzhak stories, we have a lot of Yaakov stories, right, going on. Well. Okay, that's part of their story, right? I don't think that the Imahot get their own, they're major players there, but they're major players because they happen to be married to the Avot, right? If Yaakov didn't marry Rachel V'Leah, I don't know how important they would have been to our story. Okay, and what comes after the Yaakov stories?
Mitzrayim.
You're calling it Yeridat Mitzrayim. Okay, that's a name you're giving to everything from the Yaakov stories on. Any other suggestions? Zoom people?
And maybe the division of the brothers. because they were like uniform. Until Yosef, they were uniform.
Hold on. Do people hear what's going on here in the back? Do you hear? Okay. Go on.
The division of the brothers. They with Yosef, the machloket of Yosef and his brothers actually started the whole Yeridatzmut.
So you want to call it machloket? Like how? What we gave these titles. I would call it beginning stories, Avram stories, Yitzhak stories, Yaakov stories. What's the next one?
Yes, you can say the Yosef story, but it's, yeah.
Okay, so maybe you could say the Yosef stories. What I wrote here is chapters 37 to 50, and I wrote the Yosef stories question mark. Okay, can we call this the Yosef stories? And now I want to look at the breakup of these 14 chapters, and then we could decide what we can actually call this whole entire section, a third of Sefer Bereshit. Okay, here's where you open to Sefer Bereshit, Perek Lamed Zayin. Okay. Can somebody give me, and really people talk, can somebody give me a title for what's going on in chapter 37 in Perek Lamed Zayin? What is the main?
It's machloket. It's the relationships of the brothers and their fathers and all their family issues.
Okay, that's good. You're calling it machloket. You mentioned the family. Right? You didn't say who the family is, but okay. We're talking about Yaakov's family, his children, right? I call it selling Yosef to Egypt because that's just where it funneled into. Okay, good. What happens in chapter 38? Lamed Chet.
Yehuda and Tamar.
Good. What happens in Lamed Chet? In Potiphar's house, right? Yes, good. Good. What happens in Perek Mem?
Yosef's in jail with Sarah Mashkin.
Yosef's in jail. Great. Perek Mem Aleph.
Paro's dreams.
Paro's dreams. Yosef in Paro's palace, right? Good. Perek Mem Bet.
The famine.
The brothers go down.
The brothers go to Egypt, right? And they also go back again. Good. Perek Lamed Mem Gimel.
Yosef reveals himself.
Yeah, Yehuda trying to be able to go back again.
Right. So they go to Egypt and back again, right? This is their second time going to Egypt and back again. They're talking about the brothers going to Egypt and they meet Yosef again, right? And then they go back again to their father. What happens in Mem Daled? Like who are the main players and where?
Yosef is tricking them with the cup.
So they're together, right? Where are they? Huh?
Binyamin.
Okay, we have Binyamin, the story. We have Yehuda, we have Yosef tricking them. We have all the brothers together in Egypt, right? Good. What about Memhei? Who are the main players and where are they?
Yosef tells his brothers who he is.
And
it's the brothers together in Egypt.
They're still Egypt, right? But by the end, they get back to Yaakov. Right, we keep shifting the focus of the story, right? If we started in Perek Lamed Zayin with everybody in Canaan, right? Yehuda and Tamar are a separate issue. We're gonna have to deal with them. Then the camera, as it were, leaves the family and just follows Yosef as he goes to Egypt, right? And he's in Potiphar's house and he's in Paro's palace, right? And then we hear about the famine. So we leave Yosef for a minute and we go back to Canaan and we hear about the brothers and then we follow the brothers to Egypt, right? And they do that back and forth. We do that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then they return to Yaakov and in Perek Mem Vav.
Yaakov comes to return.
Right, in Perek Vav Mem Vav, we have Yaakov with his family all leaving Canaan and going to Egypt, right? You see how the shift, the focus keeps shifting, right? Also geographically, but also who it's focusing on. And the last bit, the last 4 prakim, all have Yaakov and his family in Egypt. Okay, now since I made this nice slide and I felt bad for the room people, dear room people.
Why are you missing the part of the sibling
Just look at
rivalry?
that end. What?
The sibling rivalry between the brothers beforehand, before you get to 37.
Why did I skip it?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important part.
You're right. I could have easily called it sibling rivalry. Great. And then it would have been the brothers in
I mean,
Canaan.
the selling of Yosef came because of the jealousy and the resentment towards Yosef for having told them his dream that they would be bowing down to him.
You happier now? Is that good? Right. Go, 3. Is that better? Yes, whoever said it, whoever wanted sibling rivalry, now you got your sibling rivalry. Good. Okay. So if we could bunch these into bunches, all right, about who and where we're talking about. The first section is about Yosef and his brothers, the whole family, right? The whole family in Eretz Canaan, right? Yehuda and Tamar, again, we're gonna have to talk about in a minute, because it's obviously something that's sticking out there like a sore thumb. Okay, what is the next section about? Next section is about Yosef, right?
Yosef, yeah, just Yosef.
Right. What about the next section?
The brothers.
Next section is about the brothers, right? And what about the last section?
Yaakov.
Well, it's not only Yaakov.
But the family all together.
Back the whole family, right? Okay. There's 2 things I want to show you from this breakup that we just did, okay? The first thing is that it's a little bit of a misnomer to call it the Yosef story, right? Even though Yosef is a main player in just about all of it, okay? But if you look at the focus that the Torah is giving in these chapters, it starts and ends with the whole family, and half of the middle is following the brothers and their conversation with Yaakov, while Yosef is in Egypt, not even participating in a lot of that, okay? So it seems like it's not only the Yosef story, much as I'd like to call it that, okay? The second thing I want to look at is it starts and ends with the whole family, right? It starts with the whole family in Canaan and ends with the whole family in Egypt. It starts with the whole family with the sibling rivalry. It starts the whole family in strife, and it ends with this reconciliation at the end, okay? So it seems like there's some sort of movement that causes section 1 to lead to section 4, right? And we're gonna have to figure out what that is, okay? What changed that allowed this reconciliation? Who changed and in what ways, okay? That's a lot of what we're gonna be looking at. Okay, good. So we're gonna call this now Yosef and his brothers instead of the Yosef story. I just changed the topic of the course. All right, so we're talking about Yosef and his brothers. Let me just go back for a second to the Yehuda and Tamar. Okay, that can start to make sense now if we call it Yosef and his brothers, because we know that eventually Yehuda is going to be the most important other brother, right? If not in this story, certainly later on in Jewish history. So Yehuda gets his own little section there, and we're going to see how that fits in exactly. Okay, but if it's not the Yosef story, if it's Yosef and his brothers, then Yehuda and Tamar can fit in there. Okay, all right, good. Okay, so let's start with Perek Lamed Zayin, the beginning of the story. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. Ele toldot Yaakov, Yosef ben 17 shana haya ro'eh et echav batzon, והוא נער את בני בלהה ואת בני זלפה נשי אביו, ויבא יוסף את דיבתם רעה אל אביהם. Okay, the story of Yosef and his brothers. Where does it start? Or more pointedly, does it start in Pasuk Aleph or does it start in Pasuk Bet? And anybody who's going to answer, I'm just going to say why.
Yeah, Yosef starts in Bet. The Aleph is just about Yaakov.
Okay. What does it tell us about Yaakov?
But he's finally settling down.
But he's finally settling down. That's not much of a story.
No.
Okay. So where does it start? In other words, you could say that it starts with Bet because Yosef and his brothers are mentioned first in Pasuk Bet. Okay, but then you're going to have to figure out what to do with Pasuk Aleph. And if you open, like to see for context, don't get to Rashi yet. If we open to the Perek, what ends before this Lamed Zayin, right? If we look at the end of Perek Lamed Vav, we hear all the descendants of Esav, right? So that's obviously a different issue, right? We hear the whole list, genealogy of Esav's people. And when that finishes, we hear Vayeshev Yaakov, Ele Toldot Yaakov. Okay, so we're going to have to, one of the things we're going to figure out when we start reading the Yosef story, or the Yosef and his brother story, is when it starts. Because if Aleph is not part of it, great. So what's Aleph doing there? And if Aleph is part of it, okay, what does it add to our story?
Maybe it's like an introduction. Like now that he's settling down, so the brothers have more to do with each other. If they're always traveling like that, they wouldn't like maybe pay less attention. Like kids always argue in the car, but now that they're settling into like a. In other words,
in order to have the Yosef and his brother stories, you need some sort of peace of mind.
They're like more interaction once you're like. Not in a nomadic type of situation, and you're always moving, and walking around, and like now they're more like, in one place. Okay, a good theory. Hold on to that theory. Okay, let's move on to the first puzzle. Right. So we said Vayeshev Yaakov Be'eretz Migurei Aviv Be'eretz Canaan, which you're saying may be a prerequisite for talking about what's happening next. Okay, Ele Toldot Yaakov, and then we have the rest of that puzzle. I want to talk a minute about Ele Toldot Yaakov. If you had to translate that into English, what does Toldot mean in this context? I'm warning you, this is a trick question.
It's either going to be offspring or generations.
It's either going to be
offspring, children,
yeah,
or generations.
What's the difference?
Because I don't know, just how I think of it. Is it immediate or is it forever? Generations is Le'olam Va'ed, like that's the story of his whole future, or is it just the next generation? Just his
okay, so your story. All right. But you're missing a third option, which I think is the most shot option. Huh?
The past.
History, Toldot, right? In other words, you start off with Vayeshev Yaakov Be'eretz Migurei Aviv, Ele Toldot, and I'm going to tell you the story about Yaakov, right? Either the past or the present. Let me hear now the Yaakov story. It's kind of awkward because we heard the Yaakov story till now. We'd expect Ele Toldot Yaakov as once upon a time there was a Yaakov, and here let me tell you about the story about Yaakov, and then hear the story about Yaakov, right? But here you have Ele Toldot Yaakov, Jerry said in the past, right? Well, let me give you a summary of what happened in Yaakov's life. But we know that it's not giving you that either, right? It's giving you what's happening from here onward, okay? If we want to figure out what the word Toldot means, okay?
Same thing in Noah.
Oh, Yafeh. Linda says the same thing in Noah. Ele Toldot Noah. As a matter of fact, there's more than them. Okay, let me show you a whole bunch more. Okay, now if you flip your page, if you flip your pages, do you have it? Okay, you see all those Ele Toldot? There are lots of them. Okay, let's look at them for a minute, okay, and see if we could figure out what the word Toldot means. There are 10 Ele Toldot in Bereshit. There are another 2 in the entire Tanakh. Okay, so Bereshit is a book of Toledot. All right. The first one is Ele Toldot Hashamayim Ba'aretz B'hi Bara'am. Right, that is if you want to open your Tanakh, it's even better because then you could see the context, and you'll see in Perek Bet that the context of Ele Toldot Hashamayim Ba'aretz comes right after Vayichulu Hashamayim Ba'aretz B'chol Tzavam. After all of Perek Aleph, where we hear about the creation, right? Then we hear a summary. Everything was completed, everything was done. And then we hear Ele Toldot Hashamayim Ba'aretz B'hi Bara'am. And it goes on to tell us the second story of Bereshit, right? There's no rain, there's no people to work, and then Akash Baruch Hu creates Adam and Chava, etc. Okay? So what does Toldot mean in that context? Does it mean generations? Does it mean history? Does it mean future? Does it mean story?
History.
Well, if you say history, that's dangerous because then you're saying that what they're telling you in Perek Bet already happened in Perek Aleph, and now it's a retelling. It's dangerous only because the story is totally different in Perek Bet. Okay, but that's a possibility. it could be, if we go with the generations, even though Shamayim v'Aretz don't really have generations, okay? But it could be, now that we have this entire completed creation, let's see what happened with it, okay? And then it's looking towards the future, all right? This is the Yosef Mina Klal case, because it's a toldot of something that's not a person, all right? Let's look at all the people. Ele toldot Noach. Noach ish tzadik tamim v'haya b'dortav et Elohim italech Noach v'yolad Noach shlosha banim et Shem et Ham et Yafet. Okay, so it's telling us his 3 kids. Is it telling us his 3 kids as a list of his offspring, or is it telling us the names of his 3 kids as a precursor or part of his personal story?
His personal story.
His personal story. We know that because if you read on in Parshat Noach, you hear all about what happened to Noach, right? This is happening before the Mabul. Right? Good. If you look at this, the 3rd case, Ele toldot b'nei Noach, Shem, Ham, v'Yafet, v'yivaldu lahem banim achar Mabul, and then it gives you the genealogy in Perek Yud. All right. So is that story or is that offspring? Here it's only offspring, right? We don't hear what happens to all these people, to Shem, Ham, and Yafet. We only hear about the list, right? And the list. Now we're getting kind of a funnel. We're going to get this 3 times. Okay. We had all of the Enoshut, and then we had Noach, and then we had his 3 kids, and now we have Shem, all right? And now we're focusing on Shem, Ele toldot Shem. Shem ben Me'at Shana, and he has all these people. Do we hear about Shem's history? No, we only hear about his offspring until we get to Terach, okay? We're narrowing down, we don't care about anybody else. We're pruning the line, right? It keeps getting smaller and smaller, like we ignore all the other people, and now we're down to the most important of Shem's line, which is Terach. Okay, good. Terach holidit Avram v'et Nachor v'et Haran. Haran holidit Lot. Is this genealogy or is this story?
Both.
It's both. How do you know it's both?
Because it affects what's going to go in the future, their relationship. Like
perhaps. I would say it's both, because if you opened your Tanakh and not just trusted the little synopsis I gave you, you'll see that it's talking about Terach. Terach left Eretz Haran with these people. He went with them onward. Okay, so it's actually talking a little bit about Terach. So it's both. Okay.
But I was thinking that their family relations affects the whole future stories.
Okay.
Like Lot is really Sarah's brother.
Right, but it's still just a list of but that part is still just a list of genealogy. Here's a list. Okay, this list is important for our future. That's why we're being given, right? We're getting down to the most important part of the list. Okay, and after Terach, the most important person on his list is Avram. Where is Ele toldot Avram? Isn't that weird? There is no Ele toldot Avram. How do you like that? We don't have Ele toldot Avram. We do. We have Ishmael and we have Yitzhak. Okay, so maybe we need to hear that. You know what? Let's bracket the maybe, and then you'll tell me in a minute why Avram. Okay. Yishmael. Ele toldot Ishmael ben Avraham. We have Ele shmos bnei Ishmael. We don't hear any stories about Ishmael. This is only the genealogy. Okay. Ele toldot Yitzhak ben Avraham. Avraham holid Yitzhak. And then we have what we call the Yitzhak stories. Okay. We actually have. This is not genealogy. Now we're talking about story. Okay. After Yitzhak, look at this. We have 2 Esavs. And here's actually, I'd like you to actually, yes, open your Tanakh, okay? Because now we're getting to the important parts. Lamed Vav. Reshit Lamed Vav. Starts with Ele toldot Esav hu Edom. Right? And then we hear, if you just like leaf through, you'll see all these people in Esav's family. If you look at Pasuk Tet, Ele toldot Esav avi Edom behar Seir. Okay, so first we have Esav, and then we have specifically in Har Seir, and we have the list of all these people, right? If you skip to Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, right? It doesn't say Toldot again, but you have Ela Malachim Asher Malchu Be'eretz Edom. So you have, it's pinning down Esav to his geography. Geography of Esav is Seir Edom. This is that part of the line, okay? Now we finish with Esav. In all these pruning lines, we first actually always hear about the less important person, right? When we started with Shem, Ham, v'Yafet, right? It's first going to tell us Toldot Cham, Toldot Yafet, and then it's going to go to Shem, because let's get rid of the people we're less interested and focus, right? When you have Yishmael and Yitzhak, first you have Yishmael, who's going to get pushed aside, right? And then we have Yitzhak. Now we have Esav and Yaakov. We hear the entire Esav genealogy. That gets pushed aside, right? And now we have Yaakov. That's our case. And look how our case starts. Vayeshiv Yaakov be'eretz Migurei Aviv be'eretz Canaan. Okay, so not only is Esav, he's going to be pushed away as part of the not line, right? But Esav is relegated to Har Seir. Esav is Edom. Now, Yaakov is Canaan. And we're going to now focus, because we had in all these previous, they were all over the place, right? They had Haran and they have Ur Kasdim, and there was all these other places, and Noach was certainly all over the place. But now we're cutting out all the extraneous stuff, all the extraneous people, even the country. Like now we're focusing on Yaakov in Canaan. Okay, so now I'm asking you again, now that we saw the options of Toldot, do you think that the Toldot here, Ele Toldot Yaakov Yosef ben 17 Shana, is Toldot genealogy or Toldot history? History. History is in the past? Like this is what had happened to Yaakov?
Yeah, because Esav is also in the past. Like now it's on the start.
Esav, right? We didn't have a story. Esav, we had genealogy. Here are all his people, right? But if you look at, let's say, we had Terach, right? We have here his people, and here's what happened to him, right? And then it goes into Ishmael and Yitzhak. Ishmael is just a list of people. Yitzhak is here's what happens to him, right? Here we care about his family, right? I think what we're doing Toldat Yaakov, you know what? Let's see what the Mefarshim. So you also have Mefarshim on your page, and I'm sorry that it got cut off. I don't know why it got off. Let's look at Ibn Ezra first, okay? Ibn Ezra says like this: Ta'am ele toldot Yaakov. What does that mean? Ele toldot Yaakov. V'ta'amo ele hameoraot she'erulo v'akorot sheba'u elav. According to Ibn Ezra, this no, erulo in the past, but it's a history. It's not a genealogy. When we're talking about ele toldot Yaakov, he said now we hear the Yaakov stories, the stories about Yaakov. Rashbam says like this: Ele toldot Yaakov. He's quoting Ibn Ezra. Ele mikraot moraot she'u leYaakov v'hinei ze hevel hu. Okay, he's saying, I'm quoting this opinion that we're talking about Yaakov's history, story. That's narishkeit. He called ele toldot ha'amur b'Torah v'ktuvim. All the toldot that we just looked at. Yesh mehem shemefarshim bnei adam. Some of them talk about the people themselves. Yesh mehem rabim shemefarshim bnei banim. Some of them talk about grandchildren. Grandchildren are important because that's not the person's story already. That's already what's the future, right? That's where we're focused on. Ele toldot Yaakov, he says, Rashbam, bnei banav, shahayu shiv'im, v'he'ach noldu. He's saying the whole purpose of this Ele toldot Yaakov is not even the 12 or 13 children. The focus, where we're leading to in Ele toldot Yaakov is the shivim nefesh yerdu mitzrayma at the end of the book. Okay, that's the focus. Kitzad, how did this happen? Like what? How did the story unfold such that Yaakov would have 70 grandchildren who eventually made it to Mitzrayim? Yosef ben 17 shana v'nitkanu bo echav mitoch kach yarad Yehuda me'et echav v'yu lo banim b'ksiv v'nitgalgal davar Yosef Mitzrayim v'lo Mitzrayim Menashe ve'Ephraim shalach Yosef b'shvil aviv v'yito ad shilu shivim. He said, if we're looking to the future in the Yaakov story, right? And we're saying, how is it that Yaakov's story eventually turned into the 70 is representative of Am Yisrael, right? The Yaakov story is the story of Am Yisrael, right? Maybe I shouldn't call this the Yosef story or the Yosef and his brother story. I should call it the story of Am Yisrael, right? Or the Yaakov story, or Bnei Yaakov, or whatever. Saying, how did it happen that the story eventually evolved into Am Yisrael being in Egypt? Oh, you want to know that? Wait, let's go back to the beginning. What is the beginning? There was the Yosef, and there was the jealousy, and there was, because of that, Yehuda went with Tamar, and they had,
events,
the
chain of events.
The chain of events, right? They had Yehuda had his kids, right? And you want to see how the interaction between the brothers, and the point of this whole saga is not because we care particularly about Yaakov the person, and not because we care particularly about his 12 children as per children. right? But we care about how the notion of Am Yisrael, how the whole concept of the entire Bnei Yisrael, who eventually started in Egypt, right? The first time anybody ever referred to Am Yisrael as Am Yisrael or Bnei Yisrael is Paro in Sefer Shmot. At the beginning, he said, Hine Am Bnei Yisrael Rav Atzu Mimenu. Until then, we weren't Am, we were like an extended family, right? How did we become this Am? Oh, I'll tell you. Here's the story in these 14 Pruning that's going to tell you how this nation was shaped the way it was, okay? Now it makes even more sense that we have the Yehuda and Tamar story in the middle, right? And even though it's nice to call it the Yosef story, all those brothers' stories going to Yaakov, going to Egypt, going back and forth, the interactions between the brothers, even without Yosef, is very important because they are, as part of Am Yisrael as Yosef is, okay? But that's only something we know in retrospect. If I want to look again at the Ele Toldot, right? I said there's this pruning of the line, okay? We have this from the beginning of Bereshit, right? From the beginning of the Bereshit, we had the universal, we had all of the world, right? And all of the world didn't do such a good job, right? And eventually it all boiled down to Noach. Everybody else God got rid of. Now we have Noach, right? He's the important part. Noach had 3 sons. Shem is the important one. Shem had a bunch of kids. Terach is the important one. Terach had a bunch of kids. Avram is the important one. Avram had Yishmael and Yitzhak. Yitzhak is the important one. Huh? Klipa v'agarin. Yitzhak had 2 kids. Yaakov is the important one. Yaakov had 12 kids. I don't know. Okay.
He's so much love.
But if you're saying Yosef is the important one, what you're essentially saying is, so let's get rid of the other 11 because let's prune them away. All right. And then Yaakov's line is going to continue with Yosef. No. That's one option. Okay.
That's what the brothers were scared of, actually.
We have the benefit of having read the story, so we know that that's not where it's going. But remember that they didn't know that. Like you said, that's maybe what the brothers were scared of. Okay. Let's go back a little bit on the story to Yaakov, okay? When he was a kid, right? Remember the brachot thing with the Esav and Yaakov, and Yaakov tricked his father and he took the bracha, right? Yaakov got, what was the end of that story? Okay, the end of the brachot story, when they found out the deception, okay? What happened at the end of that story?
He gets, Yitzhak says that he can't revoke what he said, so he's going to give him a bracha of gashmiut, which he got.
Yeah, and the end of the story is?
That he runs away.
He runs away,
but
okay?
But bracha Eretz Yisrael was always his.
Okay, he runs away. As far as Yaakov did not get yet the bracha for himself. He got the bracha from Yitzhak, right? But he didn't get a bracha from God. At that point in time, when Yaakov is running away to Haran, Rivka tells him, go to my brother, I have this brother, and go take shelter there, and eventually you'll come back, okay? Now, Yaakov had the family history of everything up to Yaakov, right? And as far as he knows, he had this grandfather, Avraham, who was chosen, right? And grandfather Avraham had 2 children, and his father, Yitzhak, was chosen when the other one was kicked out, right? And now there's some issue, and he's being pushed off to Haran. So what is Yaakov thinking when he's leaving to Haran? Like, maybe Esav is the chosen one, and Yaakov are leaving. It makes sense, right? That is something that he should be thinking, right? Here he is, going over the Jordan, looking for a thing, and Esav is staying home with the father who wanted to give him the bracha, right? So it seems to Yaakov, or it may have seemed to Yaakov, that that's what was happening, right? He was being pruned out. Now, eventually, he figured out that's wrong, right? But now he's the chosen. Now, he has 12 children. Does Yaakov know whether or not there's going to be another pruning process? Nobody told, Avram was told that Yitzhak is the chosen one and not Ishmael, right? When Sarah wanted to kick out Ishmael, Avram said, God said, Kol masha Sarah shema b'kola, right? Kibi Yitzchak yikareh lechazara. That he's known. But nobody told Yitzhak who the chosen son should be. He got to choose his own bracha. Rivka did, but Rivka got a very unclear. She got an oracular kind of thing.
I found that very difficult. How she never told Yitzhak.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story. Their relationship, right? But even the nevuah that she got is a little bit oracular. It could be understood in both ways. Rav Yavod Seir could be the elder will oved the younger, or it could be the Rav et Rav Yavod Seir. Like it could be, it's not clear, okay? But Yitzhak certainly didn't get any hint, any revelation about who, and he chose one son because he knows you have to choose one son, right? So this is the son that I'm choosing to continue. Okay, now Yaakov has 12 sons. Who does he choose? Well, you're saying he's choosing Yosef, which means he thought he had to choose, or maybe he's choosing Yosef. I don't know.
But it said he loved him.
He said he loved him more. Okay, we're not up to that yet. Okay, we're gonna read that. Yeah, he did love him more. Okay, does that mean that he chose him and chose to reject all the other sons, and he's going to focus Avram's legacy on this one son? Maybe, right? Now, when Yosef was kicked down to Mitzrayim, he may have thought, okay, I'm the one being rejected, or at least I'm the first one being rejected. Maybe it's like another pruning party, and who's the last one standing is going to be the Avram's descendant, right? Okay, we know otherwise, all right? But all these players, you have to like think we're in the story now. All these players don't know otherwise, and that's how the story starts. Okay, the story starts, I think, with the assumption, also on Yaakov's part and also on the brother's part, that some sort of pruning is going to happen before we see here who continues Avram's line. Okay. Okay, I just talked a lot. Before we get to this,
there's a comment. I don't know if you want to read it.
Now's a good time for comments.
No, there's a comment.
I don't see the chat.
Okay, I'll read it too.
Yes.
Esther said, Hashem said who it was going to, and Yaakov was given the God-given brachos that were given to Abraham. Also, the wives of Yaakov knew that they were having the shiftei, I guess, which is why they wanted more children.
Is that in the pshat? Does it say anywhere that the wives knew they were having the Ishvatim? I mean, Midrash, okay. Here's a little parentheses about Midrash, okay? Hold on. Okay.
That's why Dina turned into a girl. She's really boy.
Okay. Parenthetical statement about Midrash, okay? In this class, we're not going to talk Midrash. Oh, you're there too. Voila. Not because I disagree with Midrash, not because I think that Midrash is a bad idea. I think Midrash is fantastic, okay? I don't think Midrash generally intends to say this is the historical truth, okay? I don't think Tanakh necessarily, well, that's a separate issue, also says. They're both there to teach us something, okay? And what Midrash usually does is it takes all the lacunas in Tanakh and fills them in, right? If we're missing some sort of information in the story that bothers us, then Midrash is going to give us the backstory and fill it in, okay? And that's not to tell us this is what happened in the backstory. That's to tell us, oh, if this is what happened, then this is what we could learn from it, all right? So if you have the Midrash saying that, what is it that Essie said? I miss it. Hold on a second, see if I could find it. I'm looking in the chat now. Shem said it was going to Yaakov and was giving the God bracha. The wives of Yaakov knew that they were having the Shvatim, okay? We don't have anywhere in the Torah that tells us God spoke to the wives and says you're having these Shvatim who are going to be all important for the continuation of Am Yisrael, right? Now, maybe they should have been told. Maybe they were told, but it's not important for us to hear it, okay? Those are two separate things. Maybe there's no other explanation for why is it that the wives were so adamant about having all these kids. I don't know, but the Midrash had to come up with some sort of relevant answer that makes sense to us, that tells us, oh, if you knew you're having such important, any of us, right? If we knew we're having the future, I don't know, king, Mashiach, whatever, you know, we'd want to make sure to have this kid and raise him well. And maybe that's what Midrash is aiming at. But since I don't understand Midrash, so I'm not going to go there. Right. So I'm gonna in this class, I'm going to try to keep to pshat. 1 second. Let me just go through the. It says that Leah wanted more children. She didn't want more children. She did want more children, but who knows why? Yitzhak loved Esav more. This is true, and that only strengthens what we said before. That maybe he wanted to designate Esav as being the chosen one. Yes.
In the bracha it says. That he was going to be above his brother.
Right.
So that gives him a little bit of edge. I'm not above my brothers, and maybe I am the chosen one. So why would he feel
Well, if you go, we're not learning that story, but if you go into that story, the two brachot are two totally different spheres. One is the political sphere, right? You're going to have the wealth, and you're going to have the power, and you're going to have the political, and you're going to have the whatever. And one is the chosen spiritual Avram's descendant sphere. And I think, I mean, if you look at most of the Mepharshim or most of the scholars who speak about this, they say that what Yitzhak was envisioning is having both his sons continue him, right? One is going to be in charge of this domain, and one is going to be in charge of that domain, and they're going to work together as a happy family, and et cetera, et cetera. But that's not what God wanted, right? God wanted Esav kicked out of the line, and only Yaakov continuing the line.
No, but I'm saying Yaakov shouldn't feel so like that he's not wanted, because obviously the bracha that he got was very positive. Yeah,
but the bracha that he got was the bracha that he wanted to give Esav. And he got it repeated because Malasot, that's...
Yeah, like it was his done deal though, basically.
It was a done deal once Yaakov said it.
Yeah, but
once Yitzhak said it.
In the Yashak, he knew that he got this bracha and it was a done deal.
Oh, by this point.
That's what I'm saying.
Evanti. Okay. All right. Good question.
That's a shot type of.
Okay, good. So keep that in mind when we get to the he likes Yosef part. Okay, good. Anything else before we continue? Or can we continue?
Nava?
Yeah.
Nava, I just want to understand the word pshat. Would that mean the original meaning?
That's a trick question. That wasn't fair. Okay. When I say pshat, I mean, if you looked up the words in the Tanakh, in the dictionary, the Tanakh dictionary, this is what they would mean. It's there in the words or it's not there in the words, as opposed to there's some sort of idea that's perhaps hidden and we're supposed to fill it in or understand it by ourselves, which could be read there, but could not be read there. That's not pshat. Pshat is something, well, when I say pshat, okay, I don't know what pshat means. When I say the word pshat, I mean things that you can coherently read into the words here. Coherently, convincingly, whatever. Okay, it fits with the grammar, it fits with the words, it fits with the context. That's pshat. You can have more than one pshat, right? We're going to see in a lot of cases, they're going to be words or issues that you can understand in more than one way. That's fine. Yeah? Okay. Good. I want to say a few more things before we read on. One of the most important things, if you look at Hitgalut, Revelation, in Sefer Breshit, right? If we go back to those 4, 5, 6, whatever sections we said at the beginning, the universal stories, the Avram stories, the Yitzhak stories, the Yaakov stories, and the rest of the book, okay? Let's start with the universal stories, right? How much is God prominent there in the universal stories?
99%.
He's there. That's all. God is doing everything, right? And not is God doing. God is having these conversations with Adam and with Noah, and it's not even written as this is a big deal. Vayomer Hashem El, God a nevuah, right? It's like, this is what happens. This is a story, and we're telling the story, and God is one of the players, and there's all these conversations going on. Like God is walking in the garden, and Adam hears, and it's very, very 99%, you can say. Okay, if we look at the Avram stories, how much is God prominent in the Avram stories? This is an easy question. I'm just trying to get people to talk.
A lot.
A lot. Well done. Thank you, Chaya. A lot, but I think more differentiated than in the first stories. Because in the Avram stories, now you have God and you have a person or people. As opposed to, I think, in the beginning stories, it was all just, God was one of the characters. I think when you get to the Avram stories, it's more, there are people and there's God. And God talks to the people. God talks to Avram all the time, right? But still, it's more of a ma'amad, right? It's more of a thing. Good. When you get to the Yitzhak stories, Yitzhak story doesn't talk too much. He does talk. He gives them the same brachat zera, brakat aretz as Avram gets.
Like the relationship, like
it's less. It's less. It's not. It doesn't surprise us when God talks to Yitzhak, but it's not as a massive. It doesn't seem here. Uvda, God didn't tell him what to do with his children, right? It doesn't seem as a that important. Okay. What about Yaakov?
You have the Beit El story.
You have the Beit El story. What happens in the Beit El story?
he has a dream.
He has a dream.
Not a direct conversation.
Not a direct conversation. Yes, he has a dream. He sees Malachim.
I think when he goes down to Mitzrayim, he says, Al Tira Yaakov.
Which is also in a dream. Yaakov has a lot of angels, a lot of Malachim, a lot of dreams with direct God conversations, okay? But it's you get the feeling that it's more of a, you know, when God happens to decide to want to speak to him, he'll find a way, as opposed to I'll just knock on your door and talk to you, right? It's there. Yaakov gets a lot of Hidgaluyot, and he gets a lot of, God speaks to him a lot, but I feel it's a little bit more, even more toned down. Okay, what happens after that? Now our last 14 prakim of Sefer Bereshit. How much God is in the story?
Not so nothing. Really nothing. Like,
well, you're saying nothing, you're saying not so much. Any other opinions?
But I can't remember everything, but once he got to Mitzrayim, we don't really.
All right.
Yosef talks about him.
Nobody talks about him?
Yosef talks about him.
Yosef talks about, okay, Yosef talks
Shem
about
Hashem
God.
Shagur B'Fid.
Yeah, fair. Okay, we're gonna get to that in half a sentence. Let's just say that before, okay? There is a hitgalut of God to Yaakov. At the end of the story, Al Tira Miredet Mitzrayim, Rida Mitzrayim, Eyemach, whatever. So there is that galut which belongs to Yaakov, even though it's in the middle of the Yosef and his brother stories. God never speaks to Yosef. Okay, is that true?
Well, Yosef says that God helped him decipher the dreams.
So you're saying that God speaks to Yosef through dreams.
But he doesn't even say that it's God. He just says that he dreamt.
Oh, he said he helped him decipher the dream.
Oh, he's okay. That's him talking about God, right? When he talks about Paro's dream, he says, God helped me decipher the dream. That's where he's speaking about God. I'm asking if God speaks to Yosef.
Well, if God helped him decipher the dream, so he must have spoken to him.
Maybe he just gave him this innate ability and intelligence to solve dreams. Right? When you say, Bezrat Hashem, I will succeed, right? And then you succeed. Do you say God spoke to you? Maybe. Right? It could be just God helped him. God is on my side. God doesn't mean he actually spoke to him. Even, okay? His Kisharon, he realizes was God given. Okay, that's a possibility. I'm looking at, does God communicate to Yosef? Okay, God never speaks to Yosef. Okay, what about the dreams? Yosef gets dreams. You know that, this is not a spoiler. You know that Yosef got dreams, all right? Were these dreams prophetic?
Yes.
Clear cut, yes? We're going to get to this when we talk about dreams, but there's, I think, two basic ways to look at dreams, all right? One is the modern psychology dreams that says a person dreams about things that he's thinking of during the day or his own innate inner desires and whatever, subconscious, whatever. God is not in that picture, right? So a person dreams because it comes from him, right? The other option is you get a dream because it is planted there by God. In which case it could be a prophecy, it could be a warning, it could be a whatever, but it's some sort of communication from God. So we're going to have to, when we see these dreams, we're going to have to keep in mind that it could be one or the other, and that's going to make a big difference, right? But if we say it's a prophecy, and these dreams that Yosef got were God-given, okay, a communication from God, okay, so that's God communicating, but it's certainly not on the level of God speaking to him. It's not only communicating in a dream like Yaakov had, it's communicating with symbols, right, which requires interpretation. So that's already farther away. And then the question is, what kind of interpretation? Now, we're going to see these entire 14 prakim, the entire Yosef and his brother's stories. If you were a player on the field and you just watched the news, right? And you were there with your camera and you were watching the sibling rivalry and you were watching the sale and you were watching Yosef and you follow them back and forth and back and forth. There's no God in the story, right? Then the question is, what interpretation do you give to the story? Okay. I just want to show you a nice quote, which is also on your paper. Here is a nice quote for you.
It seems like the brother's thought it was from Yosef, and Yosef thought it was from God.
Right. We're going to get to that when we get to the dreams. Although history has no meaning, we can give it a meaning. Okay. What does it mean that history has no meaning? History is a chain of events. This happened, and that happened, and that happened. Correlation is not causality. right? And just because this happened after this doesn't mean that this led to that, right? Okay, but you can give it a meaning by taking a step back, and we have the luxury that the brothers didn't have, of taking a step back and looking at the whole story and saying, oh, maybe there is some sort of rhyme and reason to this. So you can give it a meaning and say, this is an entire secular story. This is a story in which there were people and they fought with each other, and they sold one of the brothers got sold to Egypt, and those are fact. You just go through all the things in the story, and this is what happened. Or, and I think that's what we're meant to do, and that is what Yosef does in this story over and over again, is he gives it the theological meaning. He says none of this is by chance, right? This is all God directed, right? There's the Brit Ben Abtarim that God tells Avram, Yadoah Teda ki ger yeh, right? Your descendants are going to go down to Egypt. That's that. We had that. Avram has that, and this is how it started happening. As Rashbam told us before, the important part is not Yaakov and the players on the field. The important part is how all this family became a family, moved to Egypt, and started their way in Egypt, right? Where do I go with this thought? Oh, and so Yosef's telling this is all God directed. This is all part of a divine plan, right? Now,
Brit Ben Abtarim was known to them?
Well, it was known to Avram. Did Avram tell his kids? I don't know.
I mean, that's a big thing.
I don't know. We're not told. You know, if I were a Midrash, I would play on that and say, okay, one day Yaakov told Yitzhak.
Knew, then he would like have a totally different perspective of Yosef going down to Mitzrayim.
Right. Hold on. Yeah, I didn't do that. Okay. So as good believing Jews, we're very happy, and none of you blinked when I said God is directing this story. Okay. Because God directs history and etc. But this should make us uncomfortable on a different level. Let's say we all accept the fact that God directs history. This should make us uncomfortable because
free will.
Because we have free will.
Free will, right? If God is directing history, then and God caused all of this stuff to happen, then nobody's accountable. The brothers are not accountable. Yosef is not accountable. Yaakov is not accountable, because God wanted this family to move to Egypt. So God moved the family to Egypt, and how he did it was whatever.
That's the whole idea of any Bechirah Chofshi, you can say that word.
Okay, that's true, but we're not looking at any Bechirah Chofshi. We're just in our Daled Amot of these 14 prakim. Okay, and you're right. It's the same story. It's the same story.
They chose to throw him in the pit. They chose.
Okay, let's say, let's do a theoretical, which we're not allowed to do. All right. Let's say they didn't hate him, wouldn't throw him into a pit, whatever. Then what? Would the family not eventually make it to Egypt?
Yes, because they had to, because it was part of the Brit Ben Abtarim.
Okay. So what are you saying? You're saying that they are accountable, they're not accountable? They had free will, they didn't have free will?
The big picture, God's would have to happen. The way it happens is our choice.
Okay, great. Okay, so that is exactly what we're going to do. Okay, we're going to see that within each step that happens along the way. All right, I think especially in these prakim, the Torah is very much highlighting, focusing these people, their choices, their personality, their development, their accountability. And yes, they would eventually made it to Egypt, but let's see what of those are due to human choices? What could have been done differently? And if mistakes were made, and that's what I started off at the beginning, how did we get from family in strife to Canaan to family reconciled in Egypt, right? That's where God wanted us to get, to a family united and reconciled to Egypt, right? If God wanted us to get from family here to family there, it wouldn't matter if they were in strife, if they were reconciled, like if anything happened along the way. But something in this story is important to us also about the people and their personalities and their challenges and their decisions, right? And what they're accountable for, what they did right, what they did wrong, and how these people, and I'm telling you ahead, Yehuda and Yosef are obviously the main players here, how their personality changed given all the events that happened along the way. Okay, good, now we can actually start. You know what, one more thing before we start. When we speak of, and we kind of said this before, but when we speak of Yosef and his brothers, are we speaking of Yosef as Yosef and his brothers as Reuven, Shimon, Yehuda, etc.? Or are we speaking of them as representing the Shvatim? When we say Yosef, do we mean Yosef the person, or do we mean Yosef the precursor of Shevet Menashe Ephraim? Do we mean Yehuda as the person Yehuda who married the woman Tamar, or do we mean Yehuda who is eventually going to be the Malchut chosen tribe?
Both. We're seeing the individual stories, but it's there to teach us the values that they had, how they grew, whatever lessons we learned from them. But it really did happen. They really had the free choice to do it.
Okay, good. So when we hear about something that happened between Yosef and Yehuda, it's also between these two particular brothers, right? But it also may hint to how things will play out in the future kingdoms of Mamlechet Israel and Mamlechet Yehuda, right? And if we look at the ways in which it was resolved or dealt with here, we may also have some hint about not only how it would play out in Mamlechet Israel and Mamlechet Yehuda, but if you look at the news today, I think also till today, the idea of Shvatim in Am Yisrael is relevant till today. Okay, so let's look back on this. I don't know what Shevet we are. It doesn't really matter. How do we handle the fact that each Shevet has different personality, different strengths, and a different role in our history? Okay, good. All right, enough of that. Now we can actually start.
Okay.
All right, good. Here we go. Those of you at home, now you don't get the screen share anymore. You have to actually open it enough. All right. Ele Toldot Yaakov, which we said was we need to talk about the events that led led to the formation of Toldot Yaakov, of Bnei Israel. Okay. Ele Toldot Yaakov, colon. Yosef ben 17 shana, haya ro'eh et echav batzon, והוא נער את בני וילהה ואת בני זלפה, נשי אביו, ויבא יוסף את דיבתם רעה אל אביהם. This pasuk has a lot of parts. Let's break it down. Okay. Yosef ben 17 shana, that's clear, right? He was 17 when this started. היה רואה את אחיו בצאן. Okay, what does that mean?
And he was in charge of
if you can forget Mefarshim and just try to figure out why am I telling you to forget Mefarshim? Because if I'm asking you what does that mean, it's possible that there's more than one explanation, more than one way to translate it. And if you know Rashi as well as you do, right? Rashi is going to choose one over the other, and if you know Rashi well enough, you're going to say, "Oh, that's what it means," right? But let before you go to that's what it obviously means. Let's also take keep the mind open to what else it could mean. Okay, so you're saying Ra'a et Chabatzon. You're saying he was shepherding. What did you say?
He said,
which means what?
That he was.
You said in charge.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you get to that from the words? Because et echav, he shepherded his brothers, right? As if they were a flock and he was the shepherd, right? Which means perhaps they were doing all the hard
work. He was giving them
guidance, or maybe they were doing the hard work and he was there to bring them water or whatever you do to a flock of sheep, right? He was some sort of supervisor over them. Is there another option to what et echav batzon could mean?
He was just with his brothers.
Right?
They were also there.
Even today, when you have all these companies, you have, Yitzhak et Yitzhak, right? That et means with, and, right? That comes from the French et, I think. So it could be that he was part of his brothers, right? He was shepherding with his brothers, or he was shepherding his brothers, right? And I think if you just take that tiny little section of a pasuk, that already gives you two separate viewpoints of how you can look at what Yaakov thought about the relationship between Yosef and his brothers, what Yosef thought about the relationship between himself and his brothers, and what his brothers thought about the relationship, right? Who considered him part of the group and who considered him some sort of uber lording it over them favorite. Okay. V'hu na'ar et bnei vilha ve'et bnei zilpa neshei aviv. Why are you smiling, Jerry? Oh. What does na'ar mean?
You, a young lad.
Okay, so you're saying that hu na'ar is parallel to Yosef ben 17 shana, right?
Right.
Okay, so let's look at, let's break up the pasuk that way. Yosef ben 17 shana haya ro'eh et chabatzon. So he was 17 and he was shepherding. He was a youth and he did whatever. Okay, that's one option.
He was the youngest child who took care of the sheep.
What?
It was the youngest child in any family who took care of the flocks, who did the actual physical chasing after them.
And here he's the youngest and he's not taking care of the flock.
Yes, he is. He was feeding the flock.
Okay, at least with his brothers, right? Okay, so one option is he's not, it's just like, it's repeating, right? He's 17 and he's an R. So Linda's saying, why do we need the repetition, right? We already know he's 17. And if Na'ar means a youth, then we don't need to be told he's a youth. We already know he's a youth. He's 17, okay? So why do we need that hu Na'ar, okay?
Is it comparing him to, it mentions Bilhah with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah specifically.
Okay.
So he somehow, it's showing that he's a nar in relationship to them.
Okay, now, 1 second. When we have these Bnei Bilhah and Bnei Zilpah, are we repeating or like, are we doing klalu prat, or are we comparing to et echad? Let me tell you what I mean, okay? Is it, he's 17 and he shepherds with or whatever his brothers, right? Let me give you an example of how he does that. He's a youth and, this is what he does with, that's one option, right? The other option is that it's contrasting, right? With his brothers, meaning his brothers, Leah's sons, he is 17, okay? And he shepherds Leah's sons or with Leah's sons, right? But as opposed to them with the Shvachot sons, with Bnei Bilhah and Bnei Zilpah, he does something else. He doesn't shepherd them. He's ro'eh them, okay? And then we have to think maybe ro'eh is something, I don't know, better, worse? I'm sorry, nar. Is nar something better than ro'eh or worse than ro'eh? Okay, so what does nar mean in that case? I would guess, I don't know. I mean, you could take it in many ways. You could say, well, maybe since the older brothers, the Bnei Leah, rejected him, so he's forming a kind of mini coalition with the Bnei Shvachot, who are closer to his age and were less, high and mighty because they were Bnei Shvachot. Okay, so maybe since they rejected him, he'll be part of this mini coalition. That's one option, right? Another option is that, like we said before, he's with all his brothers, right? Maybe he was friendlier with these guys, and then they're all, one happy family. I don't know. But then you have second half of the third half of the pasuk. Vayava Yosef et dibatam ra'al avihem. He somehow tattles on them. Okay, who's the them? Who does he tattle on?
Bnei Leah, right? No.
You're saying Bnei Leah, and we have here all the brothers. There's three options. Either he's tattling on the Bnei Leah, or he's tattling on the Bnei Shvachot, or he's tattling on all of them. Okay? This is when you asked me before, Helen, what is pshat? Okay, here we have a problem with pshat, because when we have ro'ed meviyad dibatam ra'a, we don't know who this dibatam is, and it makes a huge difference, because if he's only bringing the dibatam, he's tattling, he's saying something bad about the Bnei Shvachot, right? Then maybe he's trying to actually, be part of the Bnei Leah group. If he's saying something bad about the Bnei Leah group, then maybe it's because he's given up on them and he wants to have as many coalition with Bnei Shvachot and at least have some allies in the family. If he's bringing dibatam ra'ah about all his brothers, then he's saying, you know what, I'm not part of this group at all. It's just me and my father Yaakov, and everybody else can jump in a lake. I'm just going to side with Abba here, right? So when we have a word like that, okay, what do we do with it? I think that that syntactically, grammatically, linguistically, whatever, I think you cannot clearly say it's one or the other, right? And if you look at the Mefarshim, one will say this and one will say that and one will say the other, because they're all legitimate, okay? They're all legitimate ways of reading the word dibatam, and whose diba is he bringing to his father, right? But every time we come across some pshat issue like this that's ambiguous, that can be read in more than one way, I think it's there because we are supposed to read it in more than one way, okay? We're supposed to think of the three options we just thought about, okay? Who is Yosef trying to form a coalition with or a coalition against? Who does he consider his allies in his family? Just his father? Just the Bnei Shvachot? Just Bnei Leah? all again, like who are his allies in the family. So we're supposed to take all three options into account when we continue reading the story. Okay. Okay.
The word nar still bothers me. It doesn't make sense as just describing his age.
Right. So Rashi will tell you that nar is a osen asmasen arut. It's used as a verb, and he's like, you know, misalsel besarotav. He's like he's being a teenage boy. Like he's acting like a teenage boy. That's Rashi's take on it, because again, it doesn't make sense for it to be a repetition.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense grammatically. Like an act, it's a verb.
Right. Okay. V'Yisrael, we're in Pasuk Gimel. Yisrael, it's interesting about why it's Yisrael and not Yaakov, right? We'd expect it to be Yaakov here. So Chazal will tell us that Yaakov is usually when you're talking about Yaakov, the person, and Yisrael, you're talking about Yisrael, Avihem Shel Yisrael, like the symbol of the father of Am Yisrael. So maybe here we already have some sort of hint that what's happening now has some sort of impact, not only on the family, but has some impact on the entire history of Am Yisrael. Okay? V'Yisrael ahavet Yosef mikol banav. Kiven zkenim hu lo. We're going to have to figure out soon what that means, or maybe next week what that means. Kiven zkenim hu lo. Ba'asa lo kutonet pasim. And he made him something called a kutonet pasim. We're going to see what that means in a minute soon also. I just want to read a few psukim. We're going to have to backtrack to all of this. Vayir'u echav ki oto ahav. Avihem, Mikol Echav. So his brothers saw that their father loved him, Yosef, more than the rest of the brothers. Visneuto, and they hated him, presumably Yosef. V'lo yachlu dabaro l'shalom, and they couldn't speak well of him. Vayachalom Yosef chalom v'yaged le'echav v'yosifu od snooto. And he dreamt a dream, and he told his brothers, and they hated him more, or they continued to hate him. Right? Okay. I read all this, and then it goes into the story about the dreams. I read all this because I want to look at the reasons why his brothers hated him. Okay, why did his brothers hate Yosef? According to what we just read, there are a whole bunch of psukim here, and there's a few reasons. What are the reasons that they hated Yosef?
He tattled on them.
One is that he tattled on them. Two
is he presenting some hostility because the fact that his mother was over their mothers.
His mother's not mentioned.
No, but we can assume that he's the son of his mother, and so they resent the fact that their father chose his mother above the
okay,
other.
I think what you're doing is you just like went ahead a step or two and didn't take us along the way. You're looking at Yaakov loved him better, and you're assuming he loved him better because of Rachel, and therefore they hated him, right?
Right.
Okay, so let's 1 second. Let's take Rachel out of the equation. Let's just stick to what it says in the psukim. In the pasuk, it says Yaakov loved him better. He loved him better. He made him this fancy coat, right? And the third reason, sorry.
That's why the brothers hated him, because he was more loved than the others.
Right. And the third reason, the chalamot. Okay, so we have three reasons why the brothers hated Yosef. The first one is because he tattled on them. The second one is because Yaakov loved him better and gave him special treatment. And the third one is because of the chalamot, right? I just want to say two things about that, and then we're going to wrap it up for today. First of all, if you look at what it tells us about how the brothers felt about Yosef. After the Yaakov loved him, we hear that yisneuto, they hated him. After the chalom, we heard Yosifu od snooto, they hated him again or more or whatever, right? But the first one, the tattling, it didn't say they hated him. It said lo yachlu dabaro l'shalom. They couldn't, I guess, speak well about him or something like that. It doesn't say they hated him for the tattling. They hated him for the other two reasons. The first one was some sort of negative something. It's not hating, okay? More importantly than that, and this is what we're going to have to look at next week, okay? We know that the dreams are a huge part of the Yosef story, right? About what they thought about the dreams and how did they come true, didn't they come true, there's dreams further on, etc. We know that the fact that Yaakov loved him best and the Ketonet Pasim also come up later in the story. The Ketonet Pasim come up later also when they tear it off of him and dip it in blood, right? Also what Yosef wears comes up again and again, right? We have the Potiphar story, he has a beged, and they change his clothes when he goes to Paro. There's a beged. There's a lot of beged, right? And the fact that Yaakov loved him and considered him his favorite is certainly a theme behind all of this, behind the whole story, all right? But what about the tattling? Where does that come up again in the story? If it doesn't come up again in the story, then like we already have enough reason to hate Yosef. Why do we need, like, what does this add, the fact that he told on his brothers? And if it does come up in the story, how does that play out further on?
I think it comes up at the real end of the story. At the end of the Sefer, when the brothers think that he probably tattled again to Yaakov, and that Yaakov probably told him to revenge them.
Yafe. Okay. Thank you, Ethan. Okay. So that may be where it's leading, right? We have to hold our breath for the entire 14 prakim, more or less, until we get to the end. At the end, even the brothers didn't know, right? The brothers said, you know, as soon as Yaakov dies, they said, oh, now he's going to get back at us, because who knows, right? Did he tell? Didn't there's a whole bunch of secrecy going on in the story. Did the brothers tell? Did Yaakov find out? Did Yosef? Why didn't he tell him? Right? There's a lot of telling, not telling to Yaakov, and so yes, I agree that's part of the story. But that's exactly the kind of thing that I started with. I said I want to look at the poetics of the story and how we're getting all these kind of like little hints and how they're all going to fit together as themes in the story. Okay, nice seeing y'all.